Welcome back to Basic Mathematics. In this video, as it says on the title card nearly behind my head, we're going to be talking about adding and subtracting decimal numbers. Decimal numbers are a natural way of extending the whole numbers that we've talked about previously. So let me get my head out of the way and show you what I mean. When we talk about a whole number, like for example the number 4,125, we can talk about the digits of this number as being in the ones place, the tens place, the hundreds place, and the thousands place, and so on. 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions, so on and so on. In order to move from one place value to the next higher one, you multiply times 10. 1 times 10 is 10, 10 times 10 is 100 times 10 is 1,000, and so on. And so to move in the other direction, you would divide by 10. And if we can keep going to the left continually, multiplying by 10 step after step after step, a natural question to ask is, why do we have to stop at the ones place? Why can't we keep going? The answer to why we can't keep going is because there has to be some way of delineating that this is the ones place. We have to start our counting somewhere. But we can get around that by introducing some notation to indicate this thing is the ones place. And we do that using a symbol known as a decimal point. And then we can continue putting digits after the decimal point, which will be in things smaller than the ones place. Running low on space to actually put my notations in, but let's put some arrows and put that way over here. If you take 1 and divide by 10, you get 1/10. So we call this thing the tenths place. Notice the TH to distinguish it from the tens place, bigger than 1, the tenths place, smaller than 1. And likewise, we have the hundredths place, the thousandths place. Once again, TH in all of these indicating it's a place smaller than 1 to the right of the decimal point. And so now we can introduce these numbers that have the decimal point and have digits after the decimal point, and we can deal with those the same way we deal with anything else. We collectively call these the decimal numbers or the decimal representations of numbers. It's one of a couple of choices we have for talking about decimal numbers or talking about these fractional values. It's in a way the easiest to work with and also in a way the hardest to work with because it's really unpleasant to deal with by hand after things get to a certain point. But let's dive right in to adding and subtracting here. Forty-two point 375 plus 137.52. Reading these numbers, the technically correct way of reading it would be 42 and 375 thousandths plus 137 and 52,000. I'm sorry, 52 hundredths. Pay attention to what I'm writing. The word and in the English language in mathematics almost always refers to a decimal point, or another way of combining a whole part and a fractional part of a number. We'll also see that in mixed numbers a little bit later on in this series. But to read a decimal number, you read the part that comes before the decimal point, you read the part that comes after the decimal point, as though it were on its own, and then you announce where it is sitting, where the last decimal place is. Sometimes that point is called the precision of the number, how many digits after the decimal point showed up. This number is given to the thousandths, so when we read it, 42 and 375 thousandths. All right. Likewise, the second value is given to the nearest hundredth, so we read it as 137 and 52 hundredths. But in order to add or subtract decimal numbers, we're going to use a similar process to what we used with whole numbers. We're going to line things up and add digit by digit. Although with decimal numbers, it can be a little bit tricky because the place values aren't always equally spaced. Our first number here has 3 digits after the decimal point. The second one has 2 digits after the decimal point. But when we write these down in a column in order to add them together, the way to make sure that everything works fine is simply to make sure that you have a column for your decimal point. And we'll go ahead and we'll drop our decimal point straight down, and that's where it will reside in the final result. Sometimes this leaves us with a number we're adding together that seems to have a gap in the number. If you would like, you can fill that gap in with a 0. 52 hundredths and 520 thousandths is the same value. And so if you put that 0 in and makes more sense to you, go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. Personally, I find that it's a little bit easier to actually leave that off so that I can look and say, oh, there's 5 and nothing. That's just 5. 7 and 2 is 9. 3 and 5 is 8. 2 and 7 is 9. 4 and 3 is 7. Nothing and 1 is 1. 179.895. 179 and 895 thousandths is the result I get here. And subtraction works in exactly the same way. (176.8 minus 89.75). 176 and 8 tenths minus 89 and 75 hundredths. We'll set this up, writing out these numbers in column, leaving a space in a column for the decimal point. And then we'll subtract as normal. And that means that we can ignore the decimal point other than the fact that it goes straight down below where the decimal points are, and treat the number as any other number. But right away we run into a trouble. We have nothing minus 5. Well, we can't just have nothing. So we have to do something about that. Here again, very often it makes sense to put in an extra 0. We call that a placeholder 0, a 0 at the end of the number that's there just to be at the end of the number. But once we have that, we can now ignore the decimal point. We can treat this as normal subtraction. which includes borrowing a 1 to make that 0 a 10 so that we can do the subtraction. And then we have to borrow over here as well. We have 16 minus 9, which is 7. We have 16 minus 8, which is 8. 87.05, 87 and 5 hundredths is the result I get here. All right, if my camera will work, there we go. So the process of adding and subtracting with decimal numbers is very little different from the process of adding and subtracting with whole numbers. The mechanics have nothing new once you have it set up column-wise. It's that first step of setting up the columns that can be challenging. So take some time, practice this skill, get comfortable dealing with decimal numbers and setting up the columns, and I'll see you in the next video.